Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome to Watch You Want. Thanks for logging on. Today, we are looking at a watch that haunted my dreams back in high school. This is the Omega Seamaster Professional 300-meter Quartz with iridescent blue dial, high polish bezel, 41.5 millimeters in stainless steel. In so many ways, this is the fairest of them all. This is the same case, it's the same technical spec bracelet, same beautiful milled clasp with peerless dive extension that you find in the famous Bond Seamaster Professional. But this one is the style standout. This is the supermodel. This is the show pony of the family. Back in the late 1990s, there were two threads of Omega Seamaster. There was the chronometer grade professional with automatic ETA movement, and then there was the professional quartz. Now, the distinction between the two is that the quartz was James Bond's first watch of the new Omega era, while the Bond is known as the famous 300-meter chronometer. It was in fact the quartz watch that debuted on his wrist in 1995's GoldenEye. In a lot of ways, this was the lineage that launched Bond into the Omega family, and this dial reads like nothing else in the Seamaster catalog. In a lot of ways, the luxury watch market is all about mechanical movements. I understand it. I think that's what probably drew me to luxury watches in the first place. It was the intrigue of those little micro machines that were operating inside the case. Quartz to some seems a little bit cold, emotionally vacant, a bit distant and inaccessible, too high-tech for the watch industry, or at least the upscale traditional Swiss watch industry. But this one is one of the few cases where I will say the aesthetic, the beauty, transcends any mechanical prejudice. The bottom line is this dial is indescribable. It has the famed Omega Seamaster Professional waves on it, but it also has a completely smooth chapter ring around its outer circumference. Gorgeous, huge, torch-like, key lime toned lume atop a lacquered dial that I literally cannot describe other than to say it's almost like an electrified, electroluminescent cobalt. Really? It looks like something that you would see inside a nuclear reactor. It is that radiant. It is that explosive. And in direct sunlight, with the facets created by those waves, this watch is the definition of expressive. As if that weren't fascinating, intriguing, eye-catching enough, Omega paired it with this engraved high polish bezel. Now, we've seen the high polish bezel on other Seamaster Professional references from this era, but the combination of that mirror finish, and you might even be able to see my face in my camera in this beautiful, immaculate example of the bezel, but the combination of that bezel and this dial with that gorgeous key lime lume is tropical, it's exotic, it's seductive. It's enough by itself to win your heart, and that's before we even talk about the other essential features of the Omega Seamaster Professional, because this watch has everything the Bond has. In fact, it's even a little bit more durable. I'll get to that in a second, but first I want to talk about the features of the case, starting with the signature Helium escape valve. Now, this watch, like the Rolex Submariner at the time, was rated to 300 meters, but Omega made a conscious decision with the Seamaster Professional 300s to include a helium escape valve from the beginning. Why do you need that? You don't! It's for operating in a diving bell or other extreme mixed gas conditions. But the bottom line is, you also don't need a luxury watch. You don't need a polished bezel. You don't need an expressive, radiant, almost hypnotic, textured, blue lacquered dial. You don't need it. You just want it. It's gorgeous. It's a conversation piece. It's emotionally compelling for reasons that really defy words, and I'm struggling to find them, because I remember this watch as a kid looking up at the windows in Tourneau in the mall, being absolutely smitten. And this is the first time since those days in the late 1990s that I have held this watch in my hand. So I can tell you, I'm speaking from the heart here, not so much the head. But that's good, because that's where our love for luxury watches comes from. It's purely romantic. It's purely, really, for the love of an idea. And this idea, in my mind, is the happy thought that makes me fly. Looking at the watch from the side, you can't tell the difference between this and the famous Bond, and that's because they share an identical case, identical bracelet, and identical double trigger activated Deployant clasp. Now, the double trigger is a fantastic piece because it assures absolute security. This is not something like a friction fit that might come undone. The bottom line is that you release it with the trigger, you close it with the trigger, it's nice and secure, you hear the snap, one trigger will not release it. Either trigger will not release it. Both triggers together, now you've released it. that's not where it ends. There's a dive clasp. That clasp extension, although in some ways it's been surpassed in the last 15 years, finally, by Rolex's Glide Lock system, it remains one of the best in the business. This was a classic, an instant classic. This absolutely put Rolex's flip lock of the same era to shame, and it remains a fantastic piece for fitting over either a dive suit or thick winter clothing like a sweater or a coat. This is a watch you can operate while wearing a snowblower without changing a thing. Just pull out the dive extension. And the bottom line is that the bracelet itself feels as good on the skin today as it did back in the day. In fact, I'm going to start my wrist shot here. I've waited a little bit to get this watch on my wrist just because I wanted the anticipation to build. Believe me, this means more to you, I'm hoping, because you're going to buy the watch, than it does to me. But to me, this is a thrill. This is something that reminds me of where I wanted to be 17 years ago, and it's a privilege to be here now wearing this watch today. And that's even in the context of all the other watches I've reviewed on the channel. I hope whoever owns this watch, it goes to a good home and you can really appreciate it, because I can tell you that here on my wrist, it's going to be awfully hard to take it off. 41.5 millimeters, it wears true to size. It's got a tremendous amount of presence because of that polished bezel, which really flows seamlessly into the case, so you really feel like you're looking at a bigger, more expressive assortment of metal facets, a larger metal presence. It isn't quite as pared down as the dark blue anodized bezel Bond Seamaster, simply because all of the metal reads as a piece, and the further away you are from the watch, the more you notice two standout elements: the metal and the dial. And the bezel blurs into the case and it blurs into the bracelet. Very supple. These links are like butter. Really, the only thing that competes with the souplesse of this on the wrist would be the absolute softest calfskin and the Breitling Ocean Racer mesh bracelet. This is that good. It's still the standard. It's still a standout 2 decades after we first saw it. The bottom line is that this Omega Seamaster Professional 300-meter quartz, 41.5 millimeters stainless steel on my wrist, 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, is everything I imagined. This is the dream come true for me. I'm glad that it passed through my hands and over my wrist before it passes on to yours. If you want this Omega Seamaster Professional 300-meter quartz, iridescent blue dial, polished bezel to become your dream come true, check it out on our website, Watch You Want. I guarantee, if you've got a heart and red blood in your veins, this blue dial will be the watch you want.